So in this week's parsha we have the story with the malachim that come to Avram. Avram feeds them a whole suda. He feeds them chema, chalav, and he feeds them meat. So even though the halachos of eating basar b'chalav are not really in this parsha, but the fact that Avram Avinu fed them basar b'chalav, fed them milk and meat, and they ate it, was actually one of the reasons why we got the Torah. Because when Moshe Rabbeinu went to Shemayim, the Malachim wanted to keep the Torah, and he told them that you guys ate basar b'chalav when you ate to Avram Avinu's house. So therefore, we are more deserving of the Torah because we keep basar b'chalav. So I thought it would be good for us to review some halachas that are very common in a kitchen that people also very often get very mixed up about them, and makes it easier if you know exactly what to do to keep a kosher kitchen. So the shaila, which I find it very often, at least I don't know how many other people find this. In a case when you would have spaghetti and meatballs for supper one night, and your wife makes the spaghetti in a fleshig pot, in a meat pot, and the next morning there's some spaghetti left over, and this spaghetti is still clean. Obviously, it wasn't mixed with the meatballs. But now for lunch the next day, you wanted to go take some cheese and melt on it and eat it with meat, with dairy. Are you allowed to do that? So this scenario comes up very often, switching milk and meat, which is really a parav dish, something that was cooked parav, and can you now use it for the opposite meat or milk? So to understand this, we have to really know a basic halacha in basar b'chalav, which is called nat bar nat, which is an acronym for noisin tam bar noisin tam, which translates to infusing taste, the son of infusing taste. The way every time when you cook either meat or milk inside of a pot, the taste of the milk or the meat gets into the walls of this pot, and the flavor is in the walls. That is what's called the primary taste. That's the first taste. When you go and recook something in that pot, and it'll be anything parav, you cook a potato in there, the pot reinfuses its taste that it has in its walls. It goes and puts it into the potato. So that potato now has the secondary taste. It's the infused taste. That's called the nat bar nat in this potato. Now, of course, we're only talking about a clean pot, because if you were to have a dirty pot, then you would be getting the primary taste from the residue that's on the pot. You would have it going directly into your potato, and that would be not bar nat, that would be obviously the primary taste. So we're not talking about that. Now, halacha assumes that any pot which is normally cleaned and washed properly, even if you didn't check it prior to your cooking, it's going to be considered clean. Obviously, a barbecue grill, which is usually not clean between usage, will not have the halacha, and you cannot assume that it's clean. But any normal pot that you have in your kitchen is assumed to be clean as long as it's usually washed. And for most of the halacha, which is the geya, we're talking about a ben yoimai. A ben yoimai is a pot that was used within the past 24 hours for either hot milk or hot meat. That's the halacha that we're talking about. So any pot that you use in your kitchen. Now, again, there's another halacha that if you don't know if you use this pot in the past 24 hours, we also assumed it was not used. So it will be a little bit easier to get around that. But if you know for sure that it was used in the past 24 hours, then is where our question starts. Now, there's two kinds of nat bar nats. There's what we call nat bar nat de isura and nat bar nat tehetera. Nat bar nat de isura is when you have an usur food, something which is treif, and you have infused taste. For example, if you have let's say a non-Jew's pot which was used for treif, and there was treif of food in there, so the treif of food got absorbed into the walls of the pot, and now if you would go use that pot for your potato, it would absorb that taste. Now that nat bar nat is going to be usur no matter how far down the line you go. That means if you take your potato and you go recook it into a second pot, and then you would cook a second potato in that pot, that second potato would also be usur. No matter how far along, we don't assume that it gets weakened and weakened as it goes along. It's going to be usur regardless of how far you go. Whereas nat bar nat tehetera, we consider it to have a weakened state as you go along. So of course the primary taste is that's the real basar b'chalav, that's the real milk or meat. But the secondary, the nat bar nat, is in a weakened state, and that doesn't have the ability to create an isser in itself. As long as you're not creating at the same time, which we'll explain a little bit later, if it already has a status of nat bar nat, at that point it doesn't have the ability to aser anything. So, meaning if you would have, if you would put you put milk into a meat pot, so at that point your meat, nat bar nat, the taste of the meat which is in the walls, it never had a chance to get the status of a nat bar nat, and it's going directly into the milk. So that's going to be a problem. We're only talking about when you have something pariv in the milk pot or meat pot, that's going to become heter. Now, the halacha differentiates between lechatchila and b'diavad. If you do it initially, or if you ex post facto, you would what's going to intentionally and initially, right? Or if it happened already, and you're going to ask a shayla about it. Now, Ashkenazim and Sephardim differ in what is considered lechatchila and b'diavad, what's considered initially and on purpose, and what's considered after the fact. So we have Sephardim here. And was that yes?
Sure.
Okay.
You're right. Absolutely.
Okay. So then we'll go through both of them. The Sephardim are more lenient in this halacha. The Sephardim consider lechatchila, meaning initially to do something, are you allowed to initially cook something in it? That means that if you know that this spaghetti, you want to use the remainders of it for lunch tomorrow, so you would not allow to initially cook your spaghetti in a fleshiga pot and then use it for lunch the next day. Now, obviously, you can't, if you're eating for spaghetti, you can't initially either cook it in a milchiga pot because you were trying to eat it with fleshigs that night. So you would be a little bit stuck. But once it was cooked already, the Sephardim consider b'diavad is once it was cooked in this pot. That means that if you made a lot of spaghetti and you have extra, so you would allow to use that food, to mix that with the spaghetti the next morning for lunch. Ashkenaz, that's the lechatchila b'diavad according to Sephardim, is the cooking process, the original cooking process. Are you allowed to originally cook it, or that's lechatchila? And b'diavad would be once it was cooked already, what could you do with it? Whereas Ashkenazim consider the lechatchila b'diavad a step later. That means that even once it was cooked already, can you now mix it or eat it at the second stage? That's where Ashkenazim consider lechatchila. That means that if you have your spaghetti in the refrigerator and it was cooked in a fleshiga pot, Ashkenazim hold you cannot go and mix that with your cheese for macaroni, for any other milchiks. If somebody by accident mixed it already, then Ashkenazim also would allow you to eat it and it would be mutter. That's the b'diavad. Now, another thing to point out is that as far as we're just going to speak about today, is talking when you cook a power food in a pot with a liquid medium. That means let's say a baked potato in a pot or macaroni in a pot. But if you actually fried something in a pot, that's more complicated, and we're not getting involved in that. And you should ask a Rav what happens if you would fry. You would, let's say, make potato chips in a shallow fried in a pan. What the halacha would be of those potatoes?
Why would it be?
Why would it be different? It gets involved in exactly what nat bar nat is. Do we consider nat bar nat because once there's a water in between, it might have lessened it, because it's really 3 steps, meaning you have the wall of the pot, then the water, then the potato. So since there's a 3rd step there, it's telling a big machlekes what exactly.
The oil.
Well, that's why I said shallow fried.
So the oil absorbs into the walls much harder than water. That's why.
It doesn't have to necessarily be water. It doesn't have to be oil there. If you would grill something, that would be a problem. Let's say the barbecue grill was clean. There's no water there. That might be part of the problem. It might go directly in. That gets more complicated beyond what we're gonna get to over here. So unless it's something which is cooked with the water, then or any liquid, it could be juice, it could be anything, then you should speak to a Rav and find out what the halacha status of that is. Now, Sometimes also, which is a very common scenario, is that you make a big pot of soup in a fleishiga pot. You have a vegetable soup in a fleishiga pot. Now you want to not necessarily eat it. Well, according to Sfardim, of course, would be able to eat that with milk, because that wouldn't be a problem. But according to Ashkenazim, you were not allowed to lechatchila go and eat that with. You're not allowed to eat it with milchiks. But the question is, you have a milchiga meal, but you want to, and you're using milchiga dishes. Can you now go take that soup and pour it into a milchiga dish while it's hot? If it's cold, obviously you're not going to have any problems. But if it's hot, you have a hot soup. Can you pour this into a milchiga dish? So here the Ashkenazim are also a little bit more lenient. On the Sfardim, anyways, you can use it, so that's not a problem. But the Ashkenazim, you could, as long as you're not directly using it with food, you're just going into a pot, into a dish, that wouldn't be a problem. Just to keep in mind, you cannot directly pour the hot soup from your fleishig pot into your milchig bowl. That would be a problem. You have to first transfer it into a second bowl, which would make it a klisheni, which comes up very often. So then you could.
The soup ladle.
So soup ladles are not so clear.
Where is the same shala as the pot then?
Right. What do you mean? You
should. Fleishig is a soup ladle. It's the same problem.
Right. Yeah. If you dip it into the pot. But obviously, if you put your soup in the fridge overnight and your soup is cold, then you could transfer it into your milchiga pot and warm it up in your milchiga pot. That wouldn't be a problem. We're talking about when the soup was from the original fleishig pot in the Kli Rishon, and from there you're trying to pour it into your milchig pot. That's where you're going to run into your problems. The ladle, if you use ladle, it's not necessarily a klisheni. It's not so what exactly the status of a ladle is when you're dipping it into a pot. It's not going to get into that now. The other thing to keep in mind is a davar charif. Davar charif, which we usually assume as onions or the like. So if you use a davar charif in a sharp food in a pot, you cooked onions in a fleishig pot. So there, that's not that davar charif takes out and rejuvenates the tam. So we don't consider a weakened state of tam. It's actually the primary taste, and there. It'll be much more complicated, and if you're definitely not allowed to eat it lechatchila, even according to Sfardim. And if it does get mixed in, you should ask a rav, because that might be a problem.
How much?
How many onions?
Yeah.
What percentage? If you bottle b'shishim, you mean?
Yes.
I mean, I don't know.
Everybody puts onions.
Right.
Everybody has onions.
Right. So that's why my parents always have a special pot for onions.
It's quite tough with raw onions, no?
I'm sorry.
Quite tough with the raw. I mean, by the time you get the onion, it's not.
Well, when you cook the onions originally, that means if you cut the onion with a fleishig knife and you fried it in a fleishig pot, so now these onions are fleishigs. Fleishig onions. So if you were, or if you did, let's say you did the opposite, you did it in a milchiga pot, and you want to mix it in your chopped liver, even if you by accident mixed it into your chopped liver, you're going to be very.
In the case of the meatballs.
Meatballs there was no.
Sorry, no, you had the spaghetti. What was the case?
The spaghetti is par. The first is not a sharp object, not a sharp food, so that's fine. But if you have your onions, the onions are going to be the davar charif, and that's going to be problematic, and you can't. You should ask around what you should do about that. Now, again, we were talking about only a ben yomeh pot, a pot that was used in the past 24 hours. If you have a pot that was not used in the past 24 hours. So then the Sfardim lechatchila could use that pot. They don't have a problem. So if you have an ein ben yomeh pot that was not used in the past 24 hours for hot food, you can go and lechatchila go and use that. Ashkenazim, there's a chachmas adam that says that if you're not able to borrow, so the person say that you should lechatchila try to borrow a pot. If there's no other pot available, if you have another pot, obviously use the other pot. But even if you don't have another pot, the Chacham Sadam says that you should try to borrow it. So now, what exactly means you have to borrow a pot? I don't have an answer for you. How far you have to borrow one from? How many neighbors? How many doors down do you got to go? I don't know. If it's if it's a slight inconvenience, you might want to be machmer. If it's a large inconvenience, I don't think you have to be machmer. I don't think that's what the Chacham Sadam meant. Now we have another rule in Chalav, which is kavush k'mavushal. That means that any liquid that stays in a container for a 24-hour period has a din of bishul, that it's cooking. So you would have the same problems over here if you have a liquid remaining in a milk container for 24 hours, this would get the status of milchigs or fleishigs. So if you are keeping some sort of salad dressing that you plan on using for a fleishiga salad in a container, you should not keep it in a milchig container, because then you will not, like according to Ashkenazim, you will not be able to use it for your chicken salad. But according to Sephardim, you would be able to use it if you kept it there, but you still should not be keeping it in there. We said kavish. It's going to be a ben yomo. Right, it's going to be a ben yomo. Right, yeah, it has to be a ben yomo thing. If it's not a ben yomo, then you can get around it. This is even cold. Right, this is even cold. Even if you keep it in the refrigerator, that's what liquid is kavish k'mavushal. We consider it cooking, even if it's for 24 hours. So the same thing would be that if you want to retain a container to keep it pariv, you shouldn't be storing milk in there or meat in there, even cold, for 24 hours, because then this container will become
even dry?
Dry, I don't think so. It has to be liquid. I assume so. Now, really, you could always use for cold food, for cold things, you can use your other kalim for back and forth. You could use a meat knife to cut your cheese, to cut cold cheese. You could use a milking knife really to cut your cold chicken if you have cold chicken in the fridge. But people are machmer to be careful not to do such things, because it's very easily, if you start doing that, to one day cut with a hot piece of chicken. So that's why we try to keep it separate. But of course, it
also may not be clean at night.
Right, it's not clean. You have problems. Then you have problems. You get a lot more problems. Right, if it has mamashas and oils and things like that. But if it's clean and you don't have a problem, really it's mutter, and if it by accident happens, then obviously you could just wash it off. But people are makbid not to use it for that, because it's very easily to get to your mix-ups. Now there's another area which comes up very often, which is ovens. Now, really, ovens is a little bit of a large shiloh. If you only have one oven, obviously the best is always to have two ovens, but some houses at least, don't have that room for the two ovens, and they have only one oven. And what is the correct way to use one oven for both milk and meat? So there's two problems always in ovens, which is called the aroma, which is called the reicha, and the zeya, which is the steam. Now, if both, obviously it's best not to be cooking simultaneously milk and meat in the oven, as there are numerous problems that could come up, even if both of them are covered, even everything, and it's best to not do that. The way to use it better is obviously one after the other. If both of them are covered, you could maybe be careful about certain things, but obviously best not to do that. The way to do is keep your oven one status. That means if you primarily use it for milk, then keep it milk, and primarily use it for meat, then keep it meat. And then you'll use that, whichever one you use, that will be your primary use, and you'll use it straight like that. If the object is the food that you're cooking is a dry food, it doesn't release any steam. You're cooking, let's say, people have problems with cakes. Cakes release as a little liquid, completely dry. Let's say a challah has no liquid whatsoever in it. So if you would have a milk challah, which we don't make anyways, but if you would have, or a cookie or something like that, that has no liquid whatsoever, it's not a liquid. It doesn't release any steam. So that wouldn't be a problem to use to bake in an oven. Let's say we're making a fleishig oven, so you want to make a milchiga dry food, that wouldn't be a problem to make it in the oven, or uncovered, right? Uncovered. If it's liquid, then if you cover it tightly, it doesn't have to be airtight, obviously, but it does have to be covered enough that it's not releasing any steam or anything like that. Now, obviously, your oven has to be clean. If you're going to have tons of grease that dripped from the past, barbecues that you're roasting and grilling in the thing, and you have grease there, then you're basically simultaneously cooking milk and meat in the oven at the same time. So we have to talk about that your oven is clean. or at least it has to be burnt out, and it's not really any residue left over there. Now again, this really also gets involved with the same shiloh we were talking about, that let's say you're cooking a par food in the fleshig oven. Again, if it's going to be a liquid par food, and you're going to have the same problems we had with pots and pans, that with using pots and pans with that food. So if you were cooking a liquid par thing in the oven, and it's a fleshig oven, then you would not be able to use that lechatchila with milchigs. If it's a dry thing like a challah, that wouldn't be a problem. So even directly afterwards, let's say you roasted meat in the oven, and then after you finished that, you took out the meat, you put your challah in, that would be fine because it's a dry food, so you would be able to cook that, and you'd be able to use that with milk. If it was a liquid thing, you wouldn't be able to use it with milk.
I don't quite get with this. You said in the beginning that the problem is with the smell and
right.
the steam.
Right.
So it's whatever comes out of the walls of the oven. But now we turn it around and say it all depends on how the food is itself. It's dry.
Well, because depending on what the food is will depend on what's produced. Meaning, if it's a wet thing, then it produces steam. If it's not wet, it's not producing any steam. So then there's not a problem with steam there.
If it were to produce something, it will do something to the oven, but not to the food itself. If my food is producing some steam,
right,
then that will do something to my oven.
Right. So
but the whole concern should be with the absorption. How does the food absorb whatever is in the oven?
Well, that's only if there's another steam.
The oven is not kosher, it's just clean.
Right. So it's in the walls. So now
right.
If the steam goes back again, the steam could produce that steam, get the stuff from the walls and put it back in the food.
Steam goes in which direction? It goes from
all
the food
over.
out?
Everywhere. Fills up the oven. It's a liquid.
Is that what you're saying? The steam from the food that's uncovered goes into the fleshig oven, and then it comes right back into the food.
Right.
And now it comes back as a bucket of color steam.
Right. That's why a liquid milchigs, even if there's no fleshigs in the oven, still has to be covered. It means if you want to cook a liquid that you're cooking, lasagna has a lot of liquid in there, right, and it's going to produce steam, then you would not be able to cook that in an oven when it's uncovered.
So let's say a person roasts a chicken in the stove, and it's uncovered, of course, and there's steam and liquid going. If an individual cleans the oven afterwards, do you have to wait? Can you wait 24 hours?
You said stove or oven? There's a difference.
I meant an oven.
Okay.
I meant an oven. Yeah. So can they? If you wait 24 hours, does that make any difference?
So that's when you want to switch it over to use the milchigs.
When can you use milchigs?
So that's where I didn't want to so much deal with koshering it. I'm going to get to it a little at the end. I'm just trying to get the problems beforehand.
Oh, so let's say there was no koshering involved. So there's no. When can you use milchigs in the oven?
If you want to use a liquid uncovered milchig, that's the only problem.
Right,
Meaning
right.
if it's dry, you could use it.
No, I'm not talking about dry.
The liquid uncovered.
Yeah.
So that's I would suggest you ask a Rav what exactly you should do. If you wait 24 hours, it definitely if you wait 24 hours.
It's clean. Let's say it's clean or self-cleaning, and then you wait.
Then you for sure could use it. Yeah. But you might not even have to self-clean it. If as long as the oven's clean, you wait 24 hours,
right.
and then you do it on the highest temperature for an hour.
Yeah.
It's also fine.
Mm-hmm.
Different places can even make a little bit less. You don't have to wait 24 hours if you just do the self-clean.
But there has to be a cleaning process.
It has to be clean, yeah. I mean, obviously, cleaning. There's two cleanings. There's one cleaning that there's no residue on the bottom.
Right.
You don't want that. Obviously, then nothing's going to help you. If there's meat on the bottom, there's
right.
Oils there.
Right.
But we're talking about when the oven is clean. But we're just questioning about what's absorbed into the walls.
Right.
So then, if you wait 24 hours and you burn out the oven on an hour on the highest broil on the highest temperature, that would be fine. So just I just want to get clear with the oven. So if you have let's assume your oven's fleshigs. If it's dry milchigs or covered milchigs, you're allowed to use that. You're allowed to do that even directly after making fleshigs in the oven. And any powder food, dry also would be fine also, and you have to use it with milk. So any challah made in a fleshig oven right after meat would be allowed to be used in with milchiks. If you're using a parve liquid, then you have the same problems that we had with kalim, so that if you, let's say, have some sort of parve dish that has steam in it, you would not be allowed to eat that parve food with milchiks according to Ashkenazim. Because it's basically you're using, the oven is considered a fleshig kli, it's like a fleshig pot. So if you have a liquid one, if you liquid food, then you would not be able to use it with milchiks. Obviously, Sephardim would be allowed to, and if you did accidentally mix it, then it'll also be fine.